Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about chord progressions using 7th chords. First off, if you like the diagrams for everything in this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, Music Theory for Guitar. And this e-guide will be something that you can study and use as a reference for years to come. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to just go download it. But I am working on it as I'm filming this lesson, so if it's available, a link will pop up on the screen that will allow you to download it. If no link appears, you can look in the description and it'll say whether it's available or coming soon. And if it's not available yet, you can sign up for our mailing list and we'll send you a copy as soon as it is available. Also, if you're signed up for our mailing list, you'll receive all updated versions as well. But don't worry, you don't need the e-guide to follow along with this lesson because all of the charts will be on the screen. And also be sure to subscribe because we add at least one new lesson every day. This is part 3.11 from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So in a previous lesson, we covered chord progressions just using basic triads. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about those same chord progressions using 7th chords. And again, just like with triads, we're going to talk about chord progressions that are diatonic to one key. So we're only talking about one key at a time. In upcoming lessons, I'll talk about chord progressions in songs that are not just in one key, that actually change keys or borrow chords from keys. And something I should point out, not all music styles sound right with 7th chords. So a lot of styles, especially if you're talking like a straight ahead rock, a lot of songs aren't going to sound right if you try to throw in major 7th chords or dominant 7th chords to replace the triads. A lot of times that's not going to sound right in the musical situations, but these are used all the time in a lot of different music, especially jazz, blues, R&B, funk, pop, or even in a lot of different types of rock. So it is important to understand this. But just be aware that you need to test it out and see if it sounds right for the musical situation you're in. Just because theoretically it works, it doesn't mean that it's going to sound good. Because 7th chords have very specific sounds. Probably the easiest ones to interchange would be minor to minor 7. Those are probably the place that they can be interchangeable the most without affecting the sound too much. But especially if you're talking about a major chord to a major 7th chord, that might not sound right at all depending on the musical situation. So it's just something you're going to have to play with and see what works for what you play. So we're going to go back to this in C major. This is C major scale. And if we turn this into a harmonized major scale using 7th chords, we would end up with C major 7 as the 1 chord, the 2 chord would be D minor 7, 3 chord would be E minor 7, 4 would be F major 7, 5 G7, 6 A minor 7, and 7 B minor 7 flat 5, and then you're back to the C major 7 for your 1. So again, chord progressions are just taking any of these chords and putting them into any sort of order or sequence and repeating them, and then you have a chord progression. So you could take any of these chords in the key of C major. Theoretically, they're going to sound good together or they work together, but you have to see what sounds best or what works for the musical situation. And there's a lot of chord progressions that are going to sound better to our ears as far as the order of chords go, just because we've heard them so much in Western music. So in the lesson where we showed chord progression with triads, we had a 1, 4, 5, and that was a C major, F major, G major. If you were to do that with 7th chords, you would end up with a C major 7, an F major 7, and a G7. Because if you look back at your chart, the 1 chord is a major 7, the 4 chord's another major 7, and the 5 chord's a dominant 7. So since we're in the key of C, that's a C major 7, F major 7, G7. But you could do it in any key. If you were in D, that would be a D major 7, G major 7, A7. If you're in the key of E, that's an E major 7, A major 7, B7. So you could try that out, a 1, 4, 5 with 7th chords, and see if it's a sound you like. It may or may not be, depending on the musical style you play. But another thing about it is you don't have to turn every chord into a 7th chord. You could just turn one chord into a 7th chord, just depending on the sound you're going for. So instead of it being C major 7, F major 7, G7, you could have a 1, 4, 5 in the key of C that's C major 7, F major, G major. So you've only turned the one chord into a 7th, and the others you kept as triads. So just because you're playing a chord progression using 7th chords doesn't mean that all the chords have to be 7th chords. It's not how it works at all. You can do them all as 7th chords, or you could just do one, or you could do a couple, or all but one. It doesn't matter. It just matters what sounds good to you and what works in the situation. Or another common thing would be to go a C major, F major, G7. And these are all going to have completely different sounds, even though they're still 1, 4, 5s in the key of C. And like I said, you have to use your ears and see what works for the situation you're in. And one thing I should point out, whenever you have a 5 chord as a 7th, so that would be a dominant 7, so in the key of C that's a G7, anytime you have a 5 going back to a 1, which this would if you repeated it, this 7th chord has a very strong pull wanting to go back to this 1 to resolve. And you'll be able to hear that if you play it. If you just played this without the 7th, it wouldn't have nearly as strong of a pull wanting to go back to the C, although there is that pull. But when it's a 7th chord, it really doesn't sound like it wants to rest there. It really sounds like it wants to go back to the 1. And just try it out and you'll understand what I'm talking about. And that's something we'll talk about more in later lessons. So another chord progression we looked at with triads was a 1, 6, 2, 5. So a basic 1, 6, 2, 5 is a C major, A minor, D minor, G major in the key of C. But if you turn those all into 7th chords, you'd end up with a C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7. And you could play those two progressions side by side with just triads and then with 7th chords to see the difference in the sound. And you'll see that they sound very different from each other, even though there's still a 1, 6, 2, 5 in the key of C. Depending on the type of chord you use, whether it's 7th chord or a triad, it's going to change the sound of the progression. Or again, you don't have to make all the chords 7th chords. You could go C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, and then just a regular G major if you wanted. Or whatever. The options are up to you and whatever sounds good. Another progression we looked at, which is one of the most common progressions in pop music, it might be the most common progression, is the 1, 5, 6, 4. And with just basic triads, it was a C major, G major, A minor, F major in the key of C. But if you turn those all into major chords, if you turn those all into 7th chords, you'd end up with C major 7th, G 7th, A minor 7th, F major 7th. And play those two side by side and hear the difference between them. Or again, you don't have to turn them all into 7th chords. You could turn 1 or 2 or whatever. And of course, this works for any key. If we did it in the key of G major, the 7th chords in the key of G major, the harmonized major scale with 7th chords is G major 7, it's a 1. The 2 is A minor 7, the 3 is B minor 7, 4 C major 7, 5 D 7, 6 E minor 7, 7 F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and then you're back to the 1. And if you looked at the chart, you would see in the key of G, those are your notes of the major scale, all turned into 7th chords corresponding to what's up here. So then we could take that 1, 5, 6, 4 and turn that into the key of G instead of the key of C. And if we used all 7th chords, we'd end up with a G major 7, D7, E minor 7, C major 7. And that would work for any of the progressions with any of the keys. That's how you do it. You just look at the chart, find a key. If you wanted the key of E flat right here, you would just pair these up to what's above. So it'd be E flat major 7, F minor 7, G minor 7, A flat major 7, B flat 7, C minor 7, D minor 7 flat 5. And then again, if you wanted a 1, 4, 5, you'd have a 1, 4, 5. So in the key of E flat, that would be an E flat major 7, A flat major 7, B flat 7. So I think you understand how to do that at this point if you've come this far in the series, but just want to make sure that you're really clear on that. So those are popular chord progressions using 7th chords. Like I said, You can turn them all into 7th chords, you can turn just one, you can turn a few into 7th chords. It doesn't matter, you just use your ears. And also, like I said, these were all in just one key, so they're all diatonic to one key. But in upcoming lessons, I'm going to show you how to actually play chord progressions in more than one key, so it's changing keys, which is another common thing to do. It's less common than staying in one key, which is why we stayed in one key to start, because that's more common. But you will find even a lot of popular songs that at least borrow a chord from another key or even change keys a few times. So we'll talk about that in upcoming lessons. So go ahead and move on to the next lesson, where we're going to reverse engineer what we did in this lesson, which is the same thing we did with triads, where I'm going to show you chord progressions without the numbers, and then you're going to have to figure out using this chart what key they're in. So I think it'll be more of a review, but there are some important things to point out when it comes to 7th chords, and some more ways to quickly tell what key something is in when you have 7th chords to use. So it's an important lesson to watch, so go ahead and move on to that lesson. And be sure to download the e-guide. All these charts are in there. And be sure to subscribe, because we add at least one new lesson every day.